economic climate. Is that the right way to say it?
Mhm.
Economic climate?
We have a climate.
There's a climate.
It's cold.
Is it climate change? Is it economic climate change?
There
even?
is an
Is that a weird thing?
It is, and it's not warming.
It's definitely
Definitely
it's
not
cooling.
warming. It's cooling. It's cooling
In this
off.
case, it's cooling. Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com, episode 82. Who do we have?
Chris O'Neill.
Kevin Butler.
Robin Kroll.
Michael Turksani. All right.
Back together.
Hello.
Back together. Yeah, we weren't sure if we were going to have you back. You guys back, but we...
You're looking at me when you said that.
Yeah, I was directing it
Yeah.
predominantly in your
maybe not.
direction. Yeah. But you're back, so we're happy. Everybody's happy.
All right.
Good. And you're back from Insurance Business Awards Canada.
Enjoyed that.
Not the US Business Awards, the
No.
Canadian Awards.
Canadian.
Okay.
We sat at a table with some people from New Brunswick,
Oh.
from BC. It was
Wow.
like from people from all over Canada.
A national
And,
table.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a fair bit of liquid happiness being consumed as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Sure was. Now, is that bigger than it's been? Was it bigger than
It felt big. It felt like
Yeah.
it felt well attended. Like it felt a little bit like sort of the IBAO thing in the sense that like everybody was really excited about being back in the
Being out,
same
yeah.
same places again. And
Cool.
yeah,
Good.
Yep.
Well, you look in pretty good shape for 6:30 in the morning. We're shooting this podcast at 6:30 a.m. on the dot.
BC
Yeah,
time.
BC time. Yeah. So we want to get into marketing attribution because I think with the current economic climate, is that the right way to say it?
Mhm.
Economic climate?
We have a climate.
There's a climate.
It's cold.
Is it climate change? Is it economic climate change?
There is
even?
an
Is that a weird thing?
It is, and it's not warming.
It's definitely
Definitely
it's
not
cooling.
warming. It's cooling. It's cooling
In this
off.
case, it's cooling.
It's also tightening.
Yeah.
Pressure's coming in. Yeah.
Yeah. So everybody's being asked, like, show me the results, right? Before we invest. And a few of our,
If we invest.
so
So if you can't show results, it's gone.
Mm.
If you can show results, we will measure it against other results and then determine like the level of impact to justify the spend. And then even then it's still not guaranteed, even if you can show it actually helps and supports the business objectives.
Yeah. So we have a bunch of deals that are now kind of zeroing in on this for themselves. That's part of what they want to know. And then for a bunch of our clients, right?
Mhm.
That, and not that we didn't have this before, but it's come up as a topic.
Mhm.
You know, how do we actually measure the impact of what we're doing?
It's a heightened attention, right?
Yeah.
On it. Yeah.
Well, it is, yeah, because everybody's looking again at their budgets and their books. They're looking at 2023, and then they're
Mhm.
scrutinizing what did we do, last year? What was that investment worth? What did it actually pay out?
Yeah.
A lot of people have the systems in place to be able to drive that information from the systems, but have they been doing it? No, because they've been too busy just kind of looking after the top line. So it's been like just, now they recognize now, and, some of our customers are realizing they've got that, that capability of measuring, but, time to look at it.
So these out there, I think, I'd have one tweak to some of that. You said they've got the data in the systems. I think in some cases, some of these organizations are coming to us and perhaps other similar agencies and asking the question, do we actually have the data to be able to measure impact? Because I think there are some organizations who aren't sure whether it's they're not sure how to measure it, or if they do know how to measure it, but they don't quite know how to pull the data out to effectively look at performance.
I think they could probably articulate kind of big picture, as in, I want to see where we've invested, which campaigns have actually driven the most qualified leads or opportunities. So they can articulate that, but they're not able to really clarify, where does that data live? How would we knit that data together and not even and then not be able to do that? And I think that's where we're being called in, and we're being able to add a lot of support, having the expertise across the different platforms, right? Because we're talking about marketing automation, we're talking about CRM, we're talking about different digital channels, where leads are being sourced, and being able to pull that together and pull that together in a report that is digestible. Because it's not only the marketing team that has to be able to understand this, but they need to be able to show that to their senior leadership.
That's
So I
right.
think that's
Yeah.
part of the conversation as well.
A huge part of it. And we've talked about this a lot over the years in various podcasts, but you might be able to explain the impact and articulate and even show to marketers, but it kind of gets lost in the chain when it goes back to their executive team, just what the impact is and how do they explain it. When we're getting brought into those conversations a lot too to help support uh, impact validation, if that's such a term.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have, so one of the things you brought up was, do they have the data? Are they able to actually measure what they have in their environment? And I think that, man, in a lot of cases we get brought in, and the technical tracking, if you want to call it that, the channels, as you said, Robin, to map into the CRM, I would call that kind of just the ability to sort of properly report, is all messed up, right? Probably a lot of it is in the actual technical tagging and tracking that has gone into making it so that we can actually see sessions and all this kind of stuff coming from the paid networks, and properly interpret, well, what is a conversion, what is an action that we care about within analytics, Google Analytics, or one of these systems. But then beyond that, it's like, how are you tying in to your CRM, and being able to then have that as like your starting point. It's like, well, how would you even have your infrastructure in place to roll your campaigns through, is a huge piece that is often broken when we get in there.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking of some instances where once we get in there, we're actually just able to discover where some of the gaps are. Where data is not being inputted, either it's not being captured properly, and then there's human intervention as well. So not being able to clearly see where all your leads are coming through, and then you're not able to see anything that happens further down the funnel.
Well, it's all the systems, to your point, it's such a mess because there's been just such an explosion of marketing technologies in the last, we'll say 10 years, but especially in the last 5 years, from adoption and sort of higher velocity of adoption in the last few years especially. And I think if I can go off script,
Do we have a script?
there's a real culling going on in budgets, and especially in MarTech budgets. And I think a lot of the investments that have been made, or they were considering making, in all these new MarTech tools, are being questioned, or in some cases cut, if there's not a real connection between value it's creating and the expense of it. And I almost wonder, somewhat selfishly, if the output of that, and call it 6 to 12 months, is slightly streamlined data inputs. Because like some of these tech stacks we see, there's like 15 tools, and you're like, holy moly, like how do we actually find a way to articulate and report and streamline all these different data touches and how they look in these tools into a CRM, into a reporting tool, if there's a third-party attribution tool or whatever? What does that all look like? It's like the craziest sort of like workflow diagram you've ever put together. And I almost wonder, because of this culling, does it kind of simplify and streamline a bit? And most people's tech stacks now actually resemble something a bit more normal and less convoluted. It's we have 3 or 4 key inputs.
Maybe.
I think one of the real problems with the culling, or the sort of like the reduction, particularly in marketing budgets, is that the thing that'll get cut is the branding piece. And when you cut the branding piece, like, I know attribution is really important, and knowing where the person first technically connected with the with the organization is really important. But how can you tell where they really connected? Like, they may have connected through some branding piece, like they may have seen it at some other point. So like the question is, like, when you start cutting back on that area of outreach on the branding side, how big of an impact are you going to have on your as your attribution software sort of picks that stuff up? That's going to drop as well. It's going to be blamed on the wrong thing.
For the most part, I would fully agree with that. I think some organizations may still have a philosophy that brand is important to us. Like some of the tech companies, like we've recently talked about, whether it's Salesforce or Chili Piper, like their brand is really important as a differentiator. I could see general cutbacks, but I could still see them doing it at a percentage relative to future spend.
Yeah, for sure.
But the only thing I was going to say is we have a client right now, one of my favorite clients that I work with. We're in the process of launching a kind of cool brand awareness from like brand to pipeline. We're calling them cohorts, and we've got an approach where we're going out and starting with awareness and branding plays. Super. It's like the toppest of top funnel, and we're monitoring, measuring, and we're pulling people down so that we can actually attribute eventual conversions from that first touch of brand. So if you're good at it and you actually know how to measure this, then we can validate it. And so it's a totally viable, legitimate marketing cost, provided we see value, but at least we can track to understand, is it working or not? But we're looking at it in cohorts. So where you start at the top of this branding play and you work your way down, great. Cohort 1, it's a roughly 6 to 8 week process all in. And it's going to encompass somewhere between 6 and 8 touches. And then we go on to the next cohort, and we're going to try and iterate and do other things like that. But we're calling it cohorts anyway.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up like a smaller example or like a smaller brand example than, you know, some of those ones that you raised, because I think those organizations probably have invested in their brand and will continue to. Whereas
it's
the
two
average,
mentalities, right?
Yeah, whereas the average, I think, business, especially the ones that we talk to that are getting squeezed and they've already been in growth mode from an investment perspective, are now cutting their teams. You know, to your point, they're going to be looking at cutting all kinds of cost, and they're probably zeroing in on lead gen as like the one thing that they might want to keep going if they think that it works. But then what are they sacrificing?
It's not just cost too. I think one of the things that gets talked about a lot, you know, it feels like every day there's like a big tech layoff, right? And one of the things you first think is, well, they're probably cutting whether it's ad spend or MarTech spend or whatever, but they're also cutting people who would run those programs.
Sure.
And in some cases, those cuts run a bit deeper, and those people are doing what any organization would call a critical marketing function to support revenue growth and driving or creation, whatever you want to call it. And I think some of the question around attribution is, who is going to do that now? Because those growth goals for these companies, perhaps they've been slashed a bit, but they still have to grow.
And I think that's kind of where I was going with like the whole first touch, last touch, you know, thing around being able to measure your marketing program at various kind of points along the way. Is that I almost think the spends were so out of control that, you know, you didn't, like you said, Chris, at the beginning, it's like the pipeline for these companies may or may not have been growing, but potentially not easily to understand marketing's overall contribution. So I think it's less about within your marketing program and picking out, brand, funnel stage spend to pipeline growth. It's more like, what's our overall marketing spend to pipeline creation? We don't care if you guys are spending a bunch up here or down there. What does that look like? And they're having a hard time even producing that. And I think it's so upside down for a lot of these companies that they're investing huge dollars and it just doesn't make sense. You know, at some point now they're coming along saying, we don't have the money to keep, you know, spend at all costs or this type of concept. Now we need to dig down and make sure that whatever we're spending on marketing to our overall pipeline and revenue growth, you know, how you're doing that, I think is like, you guys should know. I think the marketing team should have a decent understanding where we should make better investments. But I think the knee-jerk reaction from the business is like, cut brand or cut these other elements. But they almost, I think it's a symptom that they don't understand just generally how is our marketing. And to be able to look at it as just a ratio to revenue, I think is a simplistic and almost investor way to look at it. That is now what's getting the pressure on.
It's one angle.
We have to be able to look at it and say, it's not just about, you know, we've spent X on marketing, we've got this type of revenue, new revenue. It's got to be about our marketing has produced this impact on the pipeline, and we can now understand that impact on the pipeline. You know,
and like yes, I fully agree with that. I think when I said like it's one angle, you have to look at things from all sorts of different perspectives to get the full understanding. And so, is it an efficient spend? Perhaps like a lot of marketing departments, they can't even correlate actions with pipelines. So if you are, in your example, if you are able to show a level of impact on what marketing does in pipeline creation, you're already ahead of a lot of marketing groups. So that's good. But then is it like an efficient spend? Are we increasingly becoming inefficient. It costs us more to drive the same quality of leads and ops this year as last.
Sure.
Things like that. But the other thing I wonder too is, we talk about this a lot, especially if you have sort of mid-market or enterprise sales cycles. It's going to take 6 to maybe 8 months to really recognize the spend from, say, 2-3 quarters ago, what the impact is today. Not even on deals closed, but just actual validated real ops.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I wonder, a year ago at this time, the raises were coming hot and heavy, bigger than we've ever seen. We know the story.
Salary raises, you mean?
No, like the
capital
raises.
raises.
funding
Yeah,
But
raises,
the
yeah.
ability to inject more into these marketing programs, in part, increase
Sure.
headcount, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are less than a year later, in some cases from those big raises. We wouldn't likely have seen the impact of what they invested in, and we're still cutting. So what does that say? Like, I'd be curious to know in 6 more months for a lot of these huge companies that have made cuts, like, was it validated, or did we actually see flow through on more efficient pipeline creation from the stuff that their teams and programs are doing prior to those cuts? Like, I think that's an interesting thought. I don't know what that would
Well,
say, but it's interesting.
I think they're really looking at what's happening at the very top, which is the investment, and what's happening at the very bottom.
And they're protecting
Right.
for the future.
Yeah, but
Yes.
they don't see everything that's happening in the middle. And I think it goes to, I guess, a larger a challenge that I've seen with so many of our clients or prospects is just this lack of reporting, right? So that's
Mhm.
kind of like the global
Totally.
issue is
Yep.
that the amount of money that's being invested in trying to drive business and the ability to track that is being largely ignored, where you would think that if you're going to be investing this money, you need to make sure you're investing in the ability to see the impact of those dollars. And what we're talking about are really a lot of the specifics and how we've been measuring. I think some of the conversations we're having are just this baseline reporting and not having that in place.
Yep.
Which I always find quite shocking that
That's
hasn't
marketing
been part
teams
of their
don't
consideration.
marketing teams don't have the I think it's kind of like what we were just talking about around the tactics. They don't have their own grip on the
Right.
tactics that they're performing to say, I know that these tactics that we're already performing are running at this rate. So it's before it even leaves the marketing team and has to be presented to the business unit. It's like, we don't even understand what's going on.
Mhm.
Like you said, we're either moving too fast, or we got too much going on, or we just don't even have the plumbing or
Yeah.
the time to sit down and think strategically about how would we look at this. I mean, obviously we need to understand our deal flow, but I'm talking at a tactics level. And to your point, Kev, like, some of these things are going to take longer. So how is a marketing team breaking down and saying, like, we're pooling out and we're looking at a certain level of, LinkedIn brand awareness spend, and this is kind of like how we're going to look at it each quarter. So they themselves can sort of sit down and say, no, we think it's really valuable. Like, we're seeing video views
Mhm.
ever escalating.
Right.
We're not paying all that much, and we're using this in a certain way. Then they feel good about it, and then they can defend it. But I think so many of these teams, they don't even have a grip on what they're doing.
Well, they don't know what they're doing, and then if they decide, so if they talk to the stakeholders, which are generally like growth, sales,
Mhm.
right,
Mhm.
sales and accounting, and they look at that stuff and they say, well, if you guys are attributing the first touch to an email send out or something that is like specific, and we had them in our system, that was considered first touch, we're going to cut the brand. We're going to
Yeah.
cut the brand stuff, and that's
Wow.
going to have a huge impact. So, like, when will we know? When will we know that things went the wrong way with that meeting that's taking place right now?
Yeah.
Maybe in 6 months, more likely in a year.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden things will just dry up. So it's like that's the real kind of risk that people have when they're looking at marketing. They're looking at the attribution that they don't have, and over attributing to things that are just not right.
Yeah, and part of why it's so it's I think we're in this world is that it's so difficult to get, I think, two things. One, getting call it reporting, call it
Mhm.
the attribution plumbing reporting set up to begin with. So hey, we have, from a marketing teams, we have everything kind of laid out in front of us that we could, in theory, go and look at it and start to dig in. And then the second thing is the time it takes to actually optimize these things and dig into them and unpack insights, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're asking your marketing team to go back and look at, going back to your example, a dozen hand raisers and, what are we thinking around subject lines and content of the email body and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, that's going to take hours and hours and hours from someone to go and actually unpack all of that. And do they have that time? Have they set aside that time every single quarter? No. And then you multiply that by everything you're doing. It's PPC, it's your your brand channels, all this stuff. It's like, who is actually sitting down and digging into all this? That's partly what we've got our team available to our clients to help do that work.
I have literally never in my entire career met a marketer who's like, yeah, I have free time.
No.
And with all these cuts and whatever else, they have less time because now they're absorbing more responsibility from those they've survived, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think just what you were saying, Mike, Robin and I have this sort of this new framework we've put together called in the last 4 to 6 months, and we've shown it to clients. We're like, this is how you can think about attribution on that sort of brand and awareness piece, how you can think about engaged leads, converted leads, and even through to like more of a secondary level of sophistication as far as pipeline impact, attributed revenue, things like that. And we've presented this a number of times, and each time the clients, it's like their eyes open. They're like, it's like that's what they haven't been able to articulate, what they've always needed.
And that's what they want.
You can see them starting to kind of connect. Okay, well, for that, I think I would pull metrics from here and here. And usually they're kind of right. It's just like they needed that like guidance to say get there. And of course, we can support that with our expertise and say, you wouldn't do it there, you do it here, or yes, you're right along how you're thinking about it. But they need, I don't know, get the guidance, the push in the right direction. That's a huge one for sure. The other thing, I saw this on LinkedIn. This isn't my thought, but I did agree with it. They're like, the number one thing all new marketers should do, like the best piece of advice you could give, go get to know and understand your CFO or controller. Make a relationship and inroads with them so you can have more transparent conversations around the things that you're doing and the expectations they would have to see what you're doing. They'll help you fill in. I need to justify this and this and this.
That revenue conversation.
But like, I can tell you, like when I was in school for marketing, there's zero integration of like, I didn't even know what a CFO was coming out of school.
I think that's interesting because the CFO will give you a sense of how they are planning for this in their budget, right? If they're like, hey, this is how we're looking at, certain, ratios of revenue growth or whatever, they might be able to help you with that. But I do think that whether you're small or you're large and you've got, money that you've raised, in both cases, if you can't go and actually say, this is the contribution that our marketing is making. And yeah, we've talked about early indicators of success and being able to showcase, hey, we think we're getting there. I mean, ultimately that's what it's about. That's what marketing is about. I think, too often these teams are just in the weeds. They're doing tactics and they're not even understanding that they are there to help drive growth. And it's not their fault. They're just doing what they need to do. But the time it takes to do the analysis and the insights and take a step back, think about the messaging and the revenue growth. These are all things that are super important right now. And having an agency partner like Goose Digital that can come in and say, you guys don't have the time to do the deep dives. It's probably not a full-time job if we're being honest, but you've got 3 or 4 major tactics that you're doing a quarter. Let us spend the time to dig through all this stuff and come out with how you should do things better next quarter. So then how to do things better next quarter, that's the other thing, right? It's now we've got to think together. We need to make the decisions, and that's also where we're being called in. Help us look at this data, make the decisions, and decide where to invest next quarter, because that's ultimately what you're trying to do. Is you're trying to figure out how to learn from what you've done, improve, and continually drive improved value.
But this is, we can sit here and say, should have always been doing this from the start. And I think most people would say, well, yeah, that's fair. But the reality is they haven't had to with the same level of scrutiny they're now seeing today and likely will for some time moving forward. So I think any marketer or marketing leader who's looking at their budgets beyond, I think you're going to have to allocate, whether it's outsourced to an agency like Goose or whether it's internal because you have someone who can really wrap their heads around this, you're going to have to allocate time, budget, and resource towards being able to, on an ongoing basis, better articulate and prove that marketing's spend and what they're doing is adding value towards those objectives. Like,
Yeah.
and that's today, like, and the last, call it like 3 to 5 years, hasn't really been the focal point of focus, but it is now.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
we're going to find people that, and we'll wrap this up because I think Chris has a sales call.
I do.
Attribution?
Attribution.
Yeah.
Marketing lead.
Will be
marketing-
now.
But I was just going to say that I think we're going to see that, marketing is challenging and people are going to get out of marketing. I actually think that we're going to see career changes.
Like, it's not as hot now.
It's not as hot, it's not as fat and happy.
Mm.
We don't have these big, thick teams and big, thick budgets that we can just start to play with stuff. And people are going to be like, I came out of school and I really wanted to do marketing because I heard it was cool in TikTok. And now it's like, well, what do you mean revenue growth? What do you mean we got to add
actually,
value?
on that quickly though, I think because sales and marketing is always kind of like stapled together in marketing school, it's like sales is a division of marketing, like advertising or whatever. And sales programs will say marketing supports you, and it doesn't matter. But I think a lot of people, like young people, will choose marketing because like, I don't want to go in sales.
I don't
I
want
don't
to have
want-
to hold a bag.
Yeah,
Is that
I
what
don't
they
wanna-
used to say, Chris? Hold a bag? Carry a bag?
Carry a bag.
What was the bag? Was it a bag of cash?
There was actually a bag.
Is it
Um,
owed to the business?
I don't know. You're walking around with a bag of cash. That's
now
what I
all that stuff
understand.
is digital now. You just have to have a bag of stuff to kind of show people.
Oh, that's a carry a bag?
Yeah,
I
carry
thought
a
it
It's
was
like the
Oh.
briefcase.
Oh,
Anyways,
okay,
the
yeah.
point is they make a decision, say, I don't want to be in sales. I don't want to have to sell and
Too
What-
much
and
pressure.
sales tactics
Pressure.
and hold
Pressure.
a digital bag.
Digital bag.
But marketing is that now. Marketing
a
has
bag.
quotas,
Mhm.
whether it's in the form of leads, revenue support, or whatever. Like, I would say in 5 to 10 years, marketing is probably most companies, not even the super advanced ones, but even more like legacy industries, they're going to say marketing should be contributing 50% of the revenue in like 5 to
Yeah.
10 years, maybe 5 to 10. And so you are in sales now if you're in marketing. And I wonder, to your point though, if people are like, that's the kind of pressure I didn't want.
Yeah.
And they say, I don't want to do that. Because yeah, TikTok's cool and fun. You can have super creative campaigns. It still has to point back to value. And you're going to have to be able to prove that. So
Boom.
you are in sales.
Attribution
Marketing is
101.
sales.
Marketing attribution 101. Could we do a podcast on carrying a bag? Marketing
Or
carries
what's-
the bag
And
now.
talking about what's in that bag. I think
And just,
so. What's in the CMO
the
bag?
rude awakening, marketing now carries a bag. The bag? A bag? I can't remember which bag it is, but I think we need to do it.
Marketing is sales.
I think we need to do it. And marketing's getting tucked under sales now. Okay.
Mm.
It's getting tucked under sales, not the other way around. So whatever you learned in
I
school.
think marketing's being tucked under the CFO, but that's
Yeah.
that could be another discussion.
Under the thumb.
We'll talk about who's got the bag.
Yeah. Yeah. Whose thumb? All right. Good job.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll see you
Peace
next
out.
time.